今日はとてもすごいニュースがあるんです。メイがお化けのトトロに出会いました。私は自分も会えたらいいなと思っています。Hurry up, May. It's gonna rain. Okay.
Are you off to meet your dad at the bus stop?
Yes, he forgot his umbrella. It's okay, May. He'll be here soon. Totoro?
Thank you for watching over May and making us feel so welcome here. Please continue to look after us.
Continue to look after us.
Last one home's a rotten egg.
Okay, welcome to Movie Night Extravaganza, talking about Miyazaki's 1988 My Neighbor Totoro. I'm here, of course, with J. Andrew World.
Hey, konnichiwa.
Karthik, back again, hanging out. Alien Encounters on Substack, and Revolutionary Tracks with Left Flank Vets. You're still doing that, right?
Yeah, occasionally, every now and then.
And of course, Nia Cola back again. Log off already is her and Cole's Twitch stream and Marina now too. And I'm happy that everyone's here on this Thursday when we're competing with Conan Neutron's Protonic Reversal right now. He's doing a live
Our
show.
sworn enemy for tonight.
Yeah. And I think we're also competing with Log Off already.
Yeah. Just went live.
So Karthik, so reading your Letterboxd review on this movie, I noticed that you were talking about pessimism and childhood and kind of the way that this movie portrays that, and it's kind of interesting that I think this movie does. I mean, it has pessimistic elements, right? Like it's children dealing with grief, or dealing with their mother being sick in the hospital, and they're kind of reconnecting to nature and childhood and like those themes. And Miyazaki, when you actually look at him, is like a pretty pessimistic person, I think. And so I have this clip where it's from they did a documentary about Studio Ghibli, and he's talking about dreams, and it's pretty pessimistic, and I thought this would be an interesting starting point for this conversation.
早く映画終わらせなきゃいけないと。飛行機の設計家とか、設計した人っていうのは、どんなにその時は善であると思ってやっても、やっぱり時代の空間の中で機械文明そのものの手先になるから、無傷じゃないんですよ。呪われた夢なんです。アニメーションもそうです。
呪われた夢。
呪われてる。今の人類の夢っていうのはみんな呪われてますよ、どっかで。美しく呪われた夢ってことが多いんですよ。金を稼ぎたいとかそういうのは全部論外。有名になりたいっても論外。そんなのクソくらいで。そういうことじゃない。映画が素晴らしい。映画が本当に素晴らしいのかどうかわからないじゃない。本当にきちんと考えたら、映画が好きだったのはただのそういう趣味でしょうっていう。かつてそういう映画が作られたことがあったかもしれないけど、今も映画の価値があるわけじゃない。多くはくだらないんですよ、僕らのこの世界は。難しい。
That shot at the end really does it for me there, because he was about to light that cigarette that entire video, and he keeps on pausing to like say one more thing, and then he finally lights that cigarette at the end of it.
It's exactly the kind of stuff that you have to say before you smoke a cigarette. I think that's like exactly the kind of line of thought that goes in your mind when you light something that's about to kill you.
Yeah.
A little bit more. Yeah.
Miyazaki cancels for smoking, folks. No.
He's still alive though, right? Like, isn't he about to make a movie?
He retires every 3 years and then makes another movie.
Yeah, he says.
Someone also mentioned to me today, and I didn't fully register this when I was doing the research for this, that his son tried to take on his legacy, and also became like the same kind of animation style filmmaker, kind of copied his style and everything. And he came out and like told his son like, "Hey, maybe don't make any more movies. Like, I don't think you're very good at it."
Yeah,
I've watched it. They were fine, but they weren't like they were missing that heart and soul that makes Miyazaki film a Miyazaki film.
Yeah. But Nia's got the Totoro going right there.
Yeah, my little sister actually made this a couple years ago. She like sewed it together, and I just found it a couple days ago. So I was like, oh, perfect.
That's so cute.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. Is that like a soft kind of thing, or is it like a rough? Because I think the beast is actually supposed to be a very fluffy, soft.
It's like felt, but I mean, it's not fluffy. It's not like furry, but it's soft. It's pillow-like.
It's funny also that like it is supposed to be like a soft, furry beast, because literally like Totoro is like troll. So like you know what I mean? So like that's the and I think that they were worried when like redubbing it in English that it was going to lose some of the meaning for what Totoro was supposed to mean in Japanese. But
well, I mean, it's going to lose meaning anyways, because when we get films from especially anime from Japan, there's actually a word for it where they actually like recontextualize everything for the audience. So they make it more Western. And usually that's with the subbed version as opposed to the dubbed. I'm sorry, the dubbed as opposed. Yeah.
Yeah, the dubbed is the English. The dubbed is the English one.
Yeah.
The subs are the subtitle. Yeah.
Yeah. The DOMs and the subs. And anyways, no, but the subtitled ones usually are closer. But like I was watching the subtitled ones, and I'm not fluent in Japanese. I know enough Japanese to pretend I'm Pete Buttigieg and say I speak 8 languages. And like I know that like she said what, and like the subtitle said something totally different, and I'm just like, I know enough Japanese to know that's wrong. And there's a few cases like that, so I imagine like even the subtitles aren't necessarily literal, but I think they worked well enough, because like sometimes when you mean what, you don't necessarily mean what you mean. You mean it as yes.
Yeah. And Japanese is one of those languages, right? Like the tone matters. in terms of context as much as anything else, and like the way that you say things kind of emphasized means something sometimes different. So I feel like we like that doesn't translate over to English as well as because I know Miyazaki, they had a whole debacle with one of his movies getting like an English version, like getting dubbed, and none of the stuff translated, and there was like these huge misunderstandings, and he didn't want to release My Neighbor Totoro because he said like in the US as like a dubbed movie, because he was like, I don't think that this movie is going to translate over as well.
Yeah, well, it's one of his more Shinto films, because there's a lot of Shintoism, but in his films, but like it's not obliquely Shinto. So like the forest creatures and the spirits and stuff that you see in this, and Spirited Away and things like that are very much inspired by Shinto, but it's kind of like The Prophecy. If you've ever seen The Prophecy with Christopher Walken, like that's not a biblical movie, but like it's about heaven and hell, and it's a lot of fun. So it's definitely worth watching. But like it's inspired by Christianity, and this is inspired by Shinto. Like these Totoros are his own creation, but you can see it built on the foundation of Shintoism.
Yeah, and there's the whole like spiritual connection to the forest, right? Like the forest spirits, they're giving them a greeting, and it's interesting. Ghost. I think that it's interesting that like the dad seems to be versed in this, maybe like not quite taking it seriously because it's his kids being like, wow, we saw this giant Totoro in the woods, but like when he does bring them into the woods and is talking about the camphor tree and how like a giant tree shows him that this is a good place for his family to move, and the themes of it I think work really well with the 80s and what was going on in both Japan and here, where like this rapid industrialization, it was really starting to be apparent that like rapid industrialization was really starting to destroy things, and these policies are like leading to mass environmental degradation. And this movie is interesting because I think that it connects that spirituality with the actual like conditions of our world, like the conditions of modern society, and like wanting to get your family out of a situation where like the kind of almost like a sickness is going through everything, because we've gotten so far away from the natural beauty and the natural order of things and the environment, that but both in like kind of regular Japanese society and in our society too, but we never really had that. Like indigenous people have that kind of connection to like the land itself and like the forest and all of these different natural things. Like Western civilization like doesn't really have that as much.
It's kind of antithetical, yeah. That's one of the things that I definitely was going for. I think even in that letterboxd, it's more like an allusion. When I said like it kind of subverts the Western idea of a fantasy. I think like I was thinking more along the lines of the Grimm's fairy tales, and how like the forest and the woods were always seen as like these kind of perilous places where the kids go and get lost and die, and like there was a witch that was going to eat them. There'll be a candy house, and then they'll get like kidnapped and whatnot. And so there was always this association of the forest with peril, which kind of really neatly ties in, I think, to the idea of Western civilization as like predicated on like man over nature, man versus nature, kind of like this aggressive, I will conquer land and I will like have this kind of supreme man will reign supreme over nature type of relationship. But I think
mankind or humankind like needs to be in civilization, because the outside of civilization, the environment itself where we come from is so perilous that we need to kind of keep this order of like staying where you are, staying in the village, staying like staying in your town, like not going into the woods, not wandering off. And not,
which is also interestingly the plot of the Shyamalan movie The Village, right? Like it's the idea of like you'll stay within the village, and like you wouldn't, even though there like it's interestingly the village, and you're opposed to going into industrial society because you want to stay in like this prehistoric time in the village. But here and the one other kind of like connection I wanted to make, which is something that you said, Forrest, which was that like they're kind of dealing with their grief through with the help of the spirits in the forest. And I kind of instead of grief, I wondered if it had more to do with anxieties, because they were like constantly afraid of what was going to happen with their mom, and And it's also interesting to know that the Totoro and the two little trolls that follow Totoro around are like there's the big Totoro and then the two little ones. It kind of very neatly resembles either the dad and the two daughters or the mom and the two daughters. I wasn't sure who that is. It's probably more the dad, and it's a mirror of their familial relationship, I thought. Or it could also be a mirror of their fantasy or like their kind of hopes and dreams and anxieties as it comes to their mom. So I don't know if the Totoro is like kind of a sort of gender neutral parent figure or particularly referring to one or the other parent.
Yeah. Nia, you got some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I hadn't thought about that actually, and that's pretty interesting with the family structure. Yeah, there's definitely like a reverence for nature that's a really important theme that you can see throughout, and that reconnection. I was just thinking also about how when May goes missing, there's like a human-directed search for her, where they're trying to look through things using tools, look through the pond and whatnot, and they can't find her. And then Satsuki goes to Totoro and asks him to help find her. And I mean, he's like a forest spirit, so it's like she's like appealing to nature almost, asking the forest to help her. And he immediately, instead of being distressed in any way, just smiles and like takes off with her, and it becomes like an adventure. As opposed to it being like this distressing situation, he like immediately flips it around. And that's like the whole story, really. Like he's in every situation, he brings joy to it and makes it like a playful thing when it otherwise might be scary or distressing. And when you see that in the bus stop scene as well, with the rain coming down, the rain is like earlier, it's kind of, an annoyance that they're trying to run away from and get shelter from. And they're standing out there and he's like playing with it, making more drops fall down just to hear the sound of it and stuff.
Yeah, and there's that really amazing moment where she's crying and she's like, I can't find my sister. She's gone missing. Like May, we can't find her. And he just has that big mischievous, like almost like Cheshire cat grin. That comes across his face, and then he's pretty much like, oh, I know what to do, like, and then calls the bus, like the cat bus, which is like
which we totally need more cat buses. Like, Biden's Build Back Better plan was put into action. We'd all have cat buses going through our neighborhoods.
But you can only call them if you reconnect to the forest spirits.
The other thing that I could also read, the relation, the Satsuki going and calling for Totoro for help. At that point, I also read as like one of the first moments in which she truly like submits to the idea of the spirit. Like before that, I feel like she's one of those typical older siblings who tries to be the kind of adult between the two siblings. Like she wants to be the sort of almost parent figure to May when they're playing around and all of that. And that was like the decisive moment, I feel like, when she kind of fully gives in to the childlike inner child imagination, which is what I was talking about. And how like that entire episode of searching as the adults do, like in the pessimistic sort of way where the grandma's praying and all of that's going on, where she goes and like they just find her in this extremely joyful burst of like adventure. And that's how they also go and reach the mom too, and they happen to even inspire the same kind of imaginative, like she says, like, I think I can see the two of them. And the dad also says, you know what, maybe you're right. And like in that moment, all four of them end up like believing in the exact the spirits and the adventure and the joyfulness of the whole thing, which kind of makes me wonder if like the whole movie is like an allegory for like finding or getting in connection, like getting in touch with your inner child for the adults, and for the child to retain that sense of imagination and playfulness the whole time. Like there is no need for any kind of pessimism, which is kind of interesting, like that it's coming from a guy whose view of life is like this bleak and pessimistic. Maybe that's where you derive all the sense of joy from.
Yeah, and I think that Well, it seems like a theme that Miyazaki talks about a lot in these interviews, where he's like, "Listen, I'm pretty." He kind of reminds me of Zizek almost, and like he's radical pessimism. Like you know what I mean. Like he kind of has this overly pessimistic view of the world, but like loves children and wants to. He's trying to like there's a documentary. I didn't get to watch it because it's like 2 hours long, and I just didn't have time. But there's a whole I saw parts of it, and it's about like the kind of the fight to save Studio Ghibli, like because they don't have enough people working there. It's very funny that he's told his son to stop making movies because there's other clips where he's like, we need more animators that want to do hand-drawn animation. Like we don't have enough of them. They don't stick with it. And then his son does it, and he's like, not you, but anybody else in Japan that wants to come here. And because he's very outspoken about the outsourcing of these animation jobs to China, to
North Korea is a big place.
North Korea is a big place.
Yeah, there's a fantastic graphic novel called Pyongyang that came out a few years ago, where it's about an animation director who goes to North Korea to make sure that the production goes pretty well for this cartoon he's working on. He's a Canadian citizen, and it was basically his entire experience there. It's a wonderful book.
Because usually you hear outsourcing, you think like South Korea. So that's
no. North Korea has a large animation studio. Whether you want to get it done dirt cheap, you go to North Korea.
Wow.
I guess I'm not.
And they made reference to it in the Clerks animated series too. If you ever, there's this great moment where
I really fucking hate to tell you that I have watched the Clerks animated.
No, the one with Jed Nelson where everything got really trippy.
Oh, is it in the middle of the movie that you're talking about, or is it the actual show? Was it a show?
It was an animated series.
There was a Clerks. They had 6 episodes. Alec Baldwin was in it. I'm pretty sure.
Yes,
he was
Leonardo.
Yeah, he was the guy that ran the New Jersey town, and they made 6 episodes of it, and then everyone was like, "We don't want you to do this anymore."
It was funny though. That shit was hilarious.
Well, North Korea being like a cheap animation labor market is like totally news to me. I feel like we need to look into this more. Yeah,
that's why I had to ask. Like North Korea,
yeah, both Koreas really, but like specifically, if you want it done dirt cheap, North Korea is where you want to go. Although I don't think American
the Miyazaki interview, he's talking about South Korea kind of being a place that. Like a lot of the work's being outsourced to. But I have a question, I guess, both for Karthik and Nia, because I don't know the answer to this. How much do you think that the dad was humoring them throughout like his conversations, and how much? Because the first thing that happens in the movie is the soot gremlins, right, that are running around, and they're like, pretty much like you think that they're spiders, and then the granny character is like, oh, those are soot gremlins and they're ghosts. And you're like, all right, so already we're like, like that's kind of like it sounded like what you tell children, I guess, like, oh, those are just the soot gremlins running around the house. But then it seems like she completely believes it, and like the house is basically haunted, and they don't care that the house is haunted. And it's like, okay, like I'll buy that. So there are ghosts in this in movie universe, and but then the dad seems to kind of go, oh yeah, well those must be the spirits of the forest, and he gives them this thing that sounds like what you tell children, and I don't know how much you think that he's kind of tuned into that and how much it's kind of just humoring whatever, the kids are saying. I couldn't really pick up on that.
I feel like he's basically just humoring the children, like he's, as an adult, these are, I think, things that he heard as a kid too, and what explanations he had, and he's just parroting them. But the movie, they are like real in the sense of the movie, and that they're not just like the children's imagination. But I think we talked about how it's like about retaining your childhood or refining your childhood to some extent. I think that is part of it, that the kids see these things because they have that sort of childhood spirit, and the parents, the older people have kind of lost that, but they could regain it.
It is like I think it's a kind of 2-part answer, which is that I think it's almost like the kind of fanciful stories that you tell your child until you start believing it, because it becomes part of your reality, right? Like we said, like Nia points out, in the beginning, it's kind of like the thing that you tell the kids because that's how you raise children. You don't want to, feed them your especially bleak view of life right from the get-go. But over time, as you tell these stories, like how distinguishable is your reality? Like, once you baby talk the kids enough, and like once you tell the kids enough of these kind of fanciful tales, like then they become part of your life and your reality as well, right? Like, so it's kind of an interesting way to look at like the saying, the child is the father of the man type of scenario, where you're actually rediscovering your own innocence and imagination through the act of like just raising children. And I think the dad is definitely undergoing an experience of that sort, and definitely the mom too, as we find out in the end, right? Like, I don't know if that corn that say they find on the windowsill is actually a real cob of corn, or like, and it even has the engraving for mommy. So it's kind of like the animators telling us without telling us that that's actually really there. It's not a figment of anybody's imagination. That's real. So it's almost like it's the kind of thing that I mean, Forrest, you love Mad Men, which is like this line is something that Don Draper delivers emotionally at one point, where he says, like, that thing that you pretended to feel, when you feel it becomes like a part of your reality, and like it really moves you. And I think that's what ends up happening. They pretended to feel that until the end, like, because the kids are having such a good time and you're having a good time with the kids. And in the end, I think like he starts feeling it too, and the mom starts feeling it too, and then their lives become a lot more colorful, I feel like, which is
They're
the
just
point.
taking that cat bus all the time, everywhere. The cat bus is suddenly like, you know what? I'm sick of this. You guys have called me to go everywhere, and I'm listen. I'm not here for you. It was cool. It was cool.
Unless you got treats. You got treats. I might consider it.
So like I'll ask you guys this question. Like the one scene which is very, I think, one of the most outlandish of scenes in the movie. I mean, there's several of them, of course, but for me the craziest, which is like obviously the most magical of scenes, has to be the day like after they plant the acorns and the acorns grow into this huge tree. The first thing that I noticed, and I don't know
I
if
was
this
just
is just like,
I was just talking about that with Nia, by the way, before you guys came on. I was saying that that's like my favorite scene.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I don't know if you noticed that the question that I have is like, did you see that the way it sprouted, it looked like a mushroom cloud? And I was like, man, I don't know if he's like really just sneaking the imagery of the atom bomb explosion, but it's like in the opposite direction. It's actually a plant. It's an impossibility of like a destructive event can happen like that so quickly, but here it's like a growth of a plant, a tree at the same pace, and it resembles it. It looks exactly like that. And it also it casts this huge shadow and whatnot. And that's also, I think, the one event that is inescapable even to the dad, right? Because it's a direct view from their house. So obviously that didn't, I mean, if that could sprout overnight, then he has to start believing the forest spirits, because that's not happening in reality, in his reality at least.
Now, have you seen Nazca, the Valley of the Wind?
No, not yet.
Okay.
It's an earlier movie, right?
Yeah, it is an earlier movie, and just interesting fact about it before I bring up my point about it. Before he made the film, he made like 14 volumes of a manga to figure out what the story is. So like you can I don't know if it's 14, but there's a lot of stuff you can dig into. But the reason why I bring that up is that a lot of that film was about nuclear war and environmentalism. And so it kind of makes sense that like that's in his blood, and also, I mean, just it, Japan never got over us nuking them for good reason.
Well, so there's a movie that I haven't seen, but that was like kind of a similarly another animated movie that came out also in 1988, which is Grave of the Fireflies.
Oh, so good, so good.
And I was watching a video on Totoro, and they were kind of talking about how that movie obviously is like a very destroyed version of Japan, and this movie is kind of almost like an idealized, romanticized version of what Japanese society could be like. Rural, again, connected to nature. You never really, like, as much as as much as throughout this it's implied that they kind of decided to get away from the university system and, you know, like an overcrowded almost, you know, part of Japan that was industrialized, and they decided to move to the countryside, which, you know, I think a lot of movies kind of cover that. That's never really touched on, like that's, so it makes it interesting when the tree is kind of like a mushroom cloud, and you know, the mother is sick, and part of me has always wondered if, you know, the mother being sick has to do with, you know, cancer from the radiation that came from you know, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
In my baked state, I thought she had AIDS, and
Yeah.
I was very stoned the first time I ever watched this movie.
It's the prologue to Rent.
I thought it was cancer too when I like first saw it. I thought, I mean, I saw it when I was a kid. Originally watched it a bunch when I was a kid, really.
Yeah, me too.
But apparently there's a novelization, and it's tuberculosis, which actually Miyazaki's mother had tuberculosis like at the time, so he was like dealing with that in his own life. So I mean, a lot of the story is really a reflection of his own struggles.
Well,
Also,
I mean, that's true with all of his movies, but yeah.
Apparently the dad, what's his name? Whatever it is, he looks just like Hayao Miyazaki's father. So like, yeah, it's very much like an analogy for his own struggles with anxiety and grief, I guess. Well, not grief yet, but really like the stress.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the mushroom cloud tree thing is definitely intentional. Either way, and it kind of, the way it grows is like an explosion, and it's like, if you take it as being like sort of a representation of hope, it's like almost like an explosion of hope that happens. And in that scene, it happens very quickly, but they're prefacing that with them saying like they didn't see any growth for a long time beforehand. A major theme you see is these acorns from the beginning throughout the whole movie is acorns, and how they're like kind of, they look like gold, you know, like the way that they're depicted, they look like treasure. And I think, you know, they kind of represent growth and change, but also how growth happens slowly. You have to have like hope. You have to like maintain that hope and that faith. And that scene, I think, is sort of like just after a long period of hoping, you see like the fruition kind of explode all at once.
Yeah, and that's what I always found so beautiful about that scene, because like, you know, being a kid, I think, and like being really frustrated that things end up taking longer than you expect them to, and kind of like the world is you know, somewhere where you want everything to happen right when it happens and it doesn't, and you can get very despondent, you can get very frustrated with that as a kid, especially because time seems to, I think, take longer. And it seems like throughout this movie, whenever they kind of have an absence of hope, like May is lost and you know, no one can find her and everybody's looking and the worst could have happened and she has to travel, and like even for an adult, you know, Granny says like it would have taken like 3.5 hours to walk to the hospital, which, I mean, I don't know, I've walked longer than that, but you know, whatever.
He's 4 years old, Forrest.
But you get, you know, like when you're a kid and you know, like I had time periods where like I'd be on a trip back from a vacation, and like I remember like my mom's cell phone died and she was on in a different car than we were coming back from a vacation, and it feels like always the worst could have happened, and you're so scared that, you know, you can't get in contact with somebody, and these feelings, I think, are like exacerbated by being a kid. So I always found that scene so beautiful, that like finally that frustration and like feeling like, oh, well, maybe, you know, and they're at that position where like the mom, like they keep, you know, extending the mom's stay in the hospital, and it's like, you know, she's never going to come home. And it feels to me every time I watch that, like it's such a hopeful scene. Like all of a sudden they rush outside and they don't even believe that it's happening. And the next day the you know, the plants have sprouted, and although I would have been disappointed it wasn't a full tree, but whatever. But yeah, I just always felt that scene was so strong.
Well, I also think that scene is a metaphor for how baked I was the first time I watched the movie, and the mother surviving. It's like oh no, there's a sprout of hope in there, not a nuclear bomb.
Like anachronistically, I watched Totoro after I had seen already this movie Bridge to Terabithia. I don't know if you've seen that.
Familiar.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
which
I watched it in middle school. I remember being very sad about it.
yeah. I mean,
never
like
read the book?
we
read the book when I was in middle school, and then we
Okay.
watched the movie. Yeah, I was in like 7th or 8th grade.
I was probably in high school, closer to high school. I think that was when it came out, and I watched Totoro like very recently, actually, not too long ago, and I watched it again just now. But I felt like every single instance of every time that they get lost, or every time that May trips and falls in the forest is very ominous, because like we kind of are reminded of the fact that she's still a child, and like all of them, I mean even Satsuki, towards the end. And that's what made me think like, and there's a whole theory of this on the internet circulating. I don't know if you want to get into it, that like the entirety of which Studio Ghibli actually put to bed. So this is kind of no point talking about it, but it's supposed to be about like that Totoro is an omen of death, and like the two kids are actually dying at the end of the movie, and that's what's actually happening, and they become
cat
spirits
bus takes
themselves,
them
etc.
to Shinto heaven.
That wouldn't make sense for the entirety of the movie, which is about connection to childhood and connection
Right, yeah.
to kind of like the spirituality of
It's about dealing with heavier things as a child. I mean, that's really what the movie's about. And it's death is pretty heavy, but like so is a mom being sick in the hospital, dying of cancer or AIDS or tuberculosis or whatever it is.
So yeah, I mean, like especially after watching Bridge to Terabithia, which is like a story in which the entirety of the fantasy is finally, I mean, like I don't know if I'm spoiling it for anybody, but like it's entirely revealed to be a fantasy, because the girl is actually dead right at the beginning of the movie. And something I was kind of like worried, and I was dreading that it was something like that, and that this would be the only reading of it, but. It's incredible that like that's one of the reasons why I also felt like it was kind of subversive, because a lot of fantasy in the kind of, at least in the Western tradition, seems to have on its flip side this fear of mortality, and like that you would lose the child would actually slip and fall, hit their head and die, because it's so easy.
And Miyazaki does tackle that kind of fear, I think, and the Grimm's fairy tale kind of things, and like I'm pretty sure it's Spirited Away, where the parents turn into pigs, and like
that's a little more. I mean, it's also very Shinto, but it's this beautiful fusion of ideas.
Yeah, but so I think that he does tackle that kind of fairy tale, I think, within that movie. I think that's not what he's trying to do in this, but like it is interesting that he has the range. He has the range, folks.
Yeah, and Princess Mononoke, also kind of Princess Mononoke is a weird animal, because it has those Shinto influences that Miyazaki grew up with, and like he's like a goes to shrine on Christmas kind of guy, which is I don't know how to really like translate it into anything else, but
wait, is he going to be talking to James Lasseter in that? That's kind of I don't know if it's a
guy. So nice. this is he was up for they gave him I think he had multiple Oscar kind of wins, but I think this is the one where they gave him like the outstanding achievement one, which is like, oh, we skipped you at an Oscar. Like it's usually not the one that that you want to get. You know what I mean? Like but I think it's that one, but this is a clip of him talking about developing the characters for this.
In Totoro, My Neighbor Totoro, is this based upon an old folk tale? The legend of these creatures that are only seen by children.
トトロはですね、トトロを作りたいよりも、自分が今まで無視してきた日本の自然に対する感謝と愛情を表現したいと思って、そういう映画を 作りたいっていうのが出発点だったんです。バス停でお父さんが帰ってくるのを待ってると、横に不思議なものがやってくる。そういうシーンの断片と、小さな女の子が庭に立っていると目の前を半透明の変なものが通っていく。その2つのイメージだけがあって、そのまま10年以上僕のスケッチブックの中に眠ってたんです。そのバス停で待ってる子は大きいんですよね。だってそんな小さな子が、あんまり小さな子がそんなところに迎えに行くはずがないから。でも目の前をトトロが通っていくときに立ってる子は小さくなきゃいけない。で2人出てきてどうしようっていうふうに後で考えたら、姉妹にすればいいんだっていう突然解決がついたんですけど、そのどうしようのまま本当に長い間ほったらかしになってました。でその10年間の間に随分自分の家の周りを歩いたり他のところ行った時にも風景を気をつけて見るようになりました。それでこれはひょっとしたら映画に使えるんではないかとか、そういうことで随分いろいろ食べましたから、なかなか企画が通らなかったんですが、企画がなかなか通らなくてよかったんだと思いますね。キャラクターに関しては見たことないもんですから適当に書いてただ賢いんだかバカなんだかわからない大きなもので、それで、いるんだかいないんだかわからない、そういうものを作りたいと思ったんです。スタッフが書くときに物を見てる目を描くな、どっか遠くを見てるのか見てないのか、そういう目を描くようにっていつも言ってました。
That is pretty interesting that he didn't want Totoro to be looking at anything in particular, because there are only like I think a couple of scenes where the girls actually command Totoro to look at them by just after landing on his belly and like just shaking him and saying we need your help or what is your name. Even then I think like he kind of looks like he's looking far away. That's true.
Yeah, whenever I draw, I always try to make sure, like, people's eye lines are focused at a certain level at some, or it's something, I can, if I want to, I can draw eyes to make it look like they're peering directly into your soul.
Yeah, that's the beauty of like being able to animate, right? Like you can't get an actor to do that 100% all the time, but you can get an animated character to do that every time.
I mean, Christopher Walken, though, he's always peering into your soul.
Al Pacino, yeah. I think like a lot of guys that I can think of, a lot of actors of all, like all ethnicities, all genders, of course. Like even Denzel, I think like is somebody that
he's always got that 1,000-yard stare, though. Like I mean, that's just one of his trademarks. That 1,000-yard stare, which is always incredible when he pulls that out. But that's just like one of his go-to bag of tricks that makes a Denzel movie, and I love it.
No,
the Simpsons kind of uses the thing where characters have the eyes facing in two different directions, and they're not quite looking at you. But they use it a lot of times to like show a character's feeling extra crazy. They have like Marge will be looking in two different directions at once or something, and then
yeah.
It's also fascinating that he doesn't talk about it, but it's like in every analysis, it kind of like it's inescapable. How I mean, there's of course the literal cat bus, but there's also like Totoro himself or itself looks like a Cheshire cat in many occasions, and like
I don't think we should be assuming Totoro's gender or that Totoro
yeah
has
I don't think so. Yeah, I think we shouldn't be. That's one of
they them is their pronouns.
Yes. I agree with that. Yeah. But that said, like, I think it would be, I don't know what I kind of lost my point, but I was just trying to, I was trying to understand, what basically, man, I just like, I don't know what I was talking about. In fact, it was 1 second ago. I think the they them point correction just like totally threw me off because I don't know why I
Sorry about
assumed
that.
Totoro's gender before. And I should, I mean, like I call
No,
it,
I did too. I said he, but I don't know. I was
Yeah.
thinking about it. I'm like, eh.
But yeah, that's also another reason why we don't know whether it's the mother figure or the father figure, because it could equally be both, and in different interpretations. But yeah,
And
what I was saying, the analysis doesn't really talk about Totoro as similar to Cheshire Cat, which kind of could be an interesting comparison.
well,
Between,
the cat bus is definitely inspired by the Cheshire Cat, Alice in Wonderland thing, which is interesting. That so I saw the most awkward. I mean, every fucking British interviewer that talks to someone from like anywhere in Asia is extremely awkward. But there was this British on the BBC. They did a thing with Miyazaki, and the guy's like, "So you've been called the this is the worst question you could fucking ask Miyazaki if you know anything about it." But he's like, "You've been called the Japanese Disney," and Miyazaki just instantly bristles because of course he does to that question. But it is, I mean, as Disney movies are kind of an iconic, not Disney himself, but like Disney movies are kind of like an iconic look into certain styles, right? Because they all have different directors, they all have different people working on them, and they're just these snapshots, I think, of time. Sometimes not good times, like the Jim Crow Dumbo characters. But anyway, kind
Song of the South.
this snapshot of time, and in a similar way, I think that My Neighbor Totoro and different elements of Miyazaki movies kind of serve that function. Like they kind of capture a certain aesthetic and essence, and like this it's timeless, but it also, I feel like, is expressing like a snapshot in a moment, rather than kind of being tethered to I don't know exactly how I want to phrase that, but
I think Miyazaki films like work on multiple levels where we as adults can watch it and get just as much out of it as when I showed this movie to my children. Who process it on a whole other level and also are just like, oh, Totoro cute.
Totoro cute and dad high.
No, it wasn't the same time.
But Nia has to leave at 9 to go interview a porn star, which is probably much more interesting than interviewing me on this show. So do you have final thoughts on anything you wanted to bring up that didn't get touched on?
Let me think about that. I guess basically covered everything. Yeah. Like in that interview, he was talking about the reverence for nature and stuff. Yeah, that really comes out as a theme. And yeah, I think dealing with distress and with problems in your life, he basically has like two main solutions in the movie, which are like your family as well as a connection to nature.
And the cat bus.
Yeah. And like, I guess you could say that retaining your childhood is like a third sort of solution, but it's all kind of like tied together. And like that, the connection to nature, I think there's a big part of it as sort of like being part of something that is greater than yourself, being part of something that is going to continue growing, that is consistent over time, that you can have faith in, basically. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say on that.
I guess one thing that I'd add to your final thoughts, planting the acorn, like the environmental movement is taking off across the world, I think, around the same time that kind of this beliefs about nature are. And it's interesting that I think it takes a different form in the West, especially in the United States, because obviously there is the history of indigenous people having a really beautiful connection to nature and every living thing, within society, and retaining that despite literally a genocide that we waged against them. Like those ideas kind of still come through. But in Japan, the fact that they still have this connection, Shintoism and this connection to nature and the spirituality really that comes with the environmentalism. So, it's not just we need to, because I feel like the the environmentalism in the West, and especially in the United States, is like incredibly lackluster. Like it's like, why don't we save the trees? And this is like, no, we have this historic connection to the trees and the forest and this rural culture that kind of comes with that, and this much more simple way of being that, you know, is historically what we're doing. This is not historically what we're doing. Industrialization, ripping things apart, destroying nature in this way. Like that's not what historically we've done, and literally is antithetical to the spiritual values, I think, that we have.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Like the Western environmentalism is very liberal in the sense. It's very individualism about how you as an individual live your life. And the 80s Miyazaki, 80s Japan, like that was a time when that sort of individualist mentality was taking over in their culture. I mean, things used to be very different, and that became the main mode of thinking in that time period.
And also demonizing, I mean, from this side of it, like demonizing Japan, because all of a sudden Japan had made such a rapid industrialization after World War II that we went from kind of being, and not to reference Mad Men again, but Mad Men has the has when they're pitching to the Japanese businessmen, and Roger Sterling kind of stumbles in and it's just like, and he's like, we fought you guys 30 years ago. But but like that rapid industrialization, the fact that there is such a long history and spirituality that you can kind of call on and be like, this isn't who we are, because with the US, that has always been who we are. Like I mean, Anglo US culture like never had any connection to the land, because everybody was coming here from various places across Europe being like, well, I don't want to be over there anymore. Can I push some indigenous people out and like create my own homestead that has no actual connection to the land, but like, land as property rather than land as collectively utilized resource that, you're actually honoring, because you're living off the land as much as the land is kind of living off you. Like I think this movie is beautiful for that reason.
Something that's like kind of, I would say, significantly it makes your point is the concept of the ark as something that, like, you are saving all of the animals and all of civilization. They get to decide which you choose to save, etc. Like all of the beasts and all of them are loaded up on this boat, and that's all you have, right? Like it's almost like you're completely distrustful of the idea of the earth supporting you or subsisting you, but you have to make this boat, the bullshit that you built. And I mean, I'm not deriding any particular culture or anything like that, but the concept itself, I feel like it's pretty I mean, in a way, it's kind of it's full of hubris, I think, and that's one of the important things about industrial society itself. And one of the ways in which Japan kind of got beaten out of that hubris was through brute force. I think that that's something that they would, I mean, I don't know if they naturally arrived at that as much as the fact that this is like a post-nuclear apocalypse scenario for them. Like, and I kind of like, you can't see Totoro as anything other than that in any or any of the Miyazaki movies or any anime for that matter. It's all there, like all the time. It's omnipresent. So I don't know how it's definitely a return to nature and a return to like the values of nature and family and your tribe and the title of the movie itself has the word neighbor in it, which shows that your sense of community needs to be strong and your connection to the land needs to be strong.
Yeah, but Nia, thanks so much for coming on. Good luck. Good luck with your episode that we took you away from for an hour.
Right. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Pleasure talking to you, Nia.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
But yeah, so I have this clip I wanted to show about so I think Miyazaki is kind of, I don't want to claim, I guess, leftist. I don't necessarily want to claim Miyazaki the same way we claim Martin Luther King, but he has this a lot more collective. I found this really fascinating. He's talking to another very bumbling Western, I think in this case United States, if I'm not mistaken, interviewer, and it doesn't usually go well. But also, I don't understand Japanese, so like it's not like I can, you know.
You don't speak it like me in my Buttigieg way.
Yeah, so he's talking about labor collaboration, and he mentions unions in this, and the way that he views, and I don't necessarily think that it's the way that everybody doing, you know, animation in Japan, I'm sure it's not, views the collaborative process, but he starts talking about that, and I find it really actually fascinating. And you know, Andy is an artist, so I definitely wanted to play this for him.
I know you have said in the past that one of your goals in making your animated films is to give children a kind of dream, or the power to dream. And I wonder if that goal has evolved over the years, or if that's something you started with from the very beginning of making films on your own.
方向は変わってません。というよりも、僕は自分の映画というよりも僕らの映画という呼び方の方が好きなんです。ちょっと通訳してみます。
My direction hasn't changed. Rather than saying they're my films, I prefer to say that they're our films that we make.
その僕らというのは今のジブリのスタッフのことを指しているわけでもないんです。もっと前に自分が20代に仕事を始めたときに、そこで出会った人間たちと何とかして今の自分たちがやってるくだらない仕事じゃなくて本当の映画を作りたいと思った、その時の僕らなんです。ほとんどの人間はもう仕事に携わっていませんけども、やはりその時の気持ちが今自分の中で僕らの映画っていうふうに言わせてるんだと僕は思ってますけど。
And it's not necessarily that I'm thinking of my current staff when I say our films. I'm thinking of the people that I started working with in my 20s. And when we discussed among each other that we want to quit making these trashy things and we want to make better films, those are the people that I'm thinking of. Many of them are no longer working in the animation area, or they've retired or whatever. But it's those people, my old colleagues, that I think about when I think that I'm making our films.
小さな労働組合があって、アニメーターの代表やディレクターの代表や、それからインクペイントの代表やカメラマンの代表、エディターの代表、それから制作進行の代表、そういう人たちが集まって、まあ組合の話もしましたけど、映画作りの話を随分しました。その時に、つまりアニメーターの意見だけではなくて、カメラマンの意見やインクペイントの人たちの誇りを持ちたいという思いとか、いろんなものの上に自分たちの進路が定まるんだっていうふうに、その時に思ったことが未だに尾を引いてるから、つい僕はその僕らの映画って呼んでしまうんです。
Those of us who were directors, animators, ink painters, production people, all gathered together within like the labor union and discussed issues. So I think what we were trying to do is to make things that will satisfy each of our own specific roles, whether we be an animator or an ink painter. And it's that in that sense that I think that we're making our movies.
Nice. I know a lot of in Japan, like comics are also made with a group of people. Like
by the way, he thinks that people need to stop making manga as movies, like as animated movies, which is another funny clip I was going to play for you. But
which is weird because like Automo, who is like one of my favorite artists, very specifically, actually worked on, like, directed and made the anime of his own book. And I think that's that's why Akira is so pure. But
I just thought it's almost like I don't know, like the various animated directors here, right? That will turn around and be like, yeah, they need to stop making comic book movies. Like I'm tired of comic book movies. I want to see more more original content. So there's a clip that I clipped of that for you, but yeah, I don't know. I thought it was funny.
Yeah, no, but it's but the thing is though is both like mediums are done collectively. So like in manga, the mangaka will like draw just the figures or whatever, and writes the stories and have the speech bubbles, and then another artist will come in and who just
Write
does
the
buildings.
stories, got the speech bubbles.
Exactly, and you froze up there. That's great.
Yeah, I did. I freeze up? I'm on terrible Wi-Fi. I'm literally next to my fucking modem, and I have good Wi-Fi. And my Wi-Fi is every time I start streaming, just decides to fucking crap out on me.
It's probably like use a cable or something like that. That probably
I should start doing that. I literally moved my setup downstairs to have it next to it.
I wondered if the translator was unsure of the word, and that's why she paused in an awkward way. But she definitely had a very awkward pause when she said labor union. It's like I don't know if that's like something.
Well, I mean, Amy Klobuchar does not like labor unions.
Yeah.
One thing I think is that I don't know. To stick up for the translator, for my fellow white American, to stand up for the translator, I would be fucking terrified as a translator to be Miyazaki's translator, because he has a long history of deriding dubbed Japanese movies where he's like, they didn't get what I wanted to say, or what the director wanted to say, what he wanted to say specifically too, like out of the movie.
I mean, Princess Mononoke was famously rewritten by Neil Gaiman, who spent a year in Japan to like really getting to know the culture to be able to write a script for the film. And the director of the American dub got a hold of the script and said, none of these match up with what their lips are doing. So he rewrote the film himself.
Oh my god.
So Princess Mononoke, the except for the wolf played by Gillian Anderson, who's absolutely brilliant, like the most shining part of the film.
Which, by the way, shout out to Gillian Anderson being one of the few American actresses that have ever gotten commissioned to play a British person rather than the other way around, when she played fucking Margaret Thatcher in The Crown.
But yeah, no, Gillian Anderson is fantastic. But like she got this great role. I actually saw Neil Gaiman speak in person right around the time that the version came out. So he's kind of speaking very candidly about this, and he's just like he's like, all my words were completely rewritten except for the words of Gillian Anderson, which I'm afraid that she's going to be typecast as a giant wolf.
I was gonna say there weren't any gay pirates in call back to last episode when I was talking
the weird
about
thing
Stardust.
is there's no gay pirates in the book Stardust, but that's a whole other story.
So Robert De Niro just is there, and he's like, I've had this dream role for a while. I've wanted to be a gay pirate. Can you work that in?
Yeah, cross-dressing gay pirate.
I think I always will remember Howl from Howl's Moving Castle as like voiced by Christian Bale. I don't think it's like even possible to think of Howl as I mean I haven't even heard the Japanese voice for Howl, but like I feel like it just got immortalized as like a Christian Bale voice for me. I mean, especially after like hearing his double voice performance in Batman and as Batman and as Bruce Wayne. Yeah, it's kind of almost like
my mom. I mean, I've talked about. Well, you can see one of her pieces right behind me over there. My mom's like a multimedia artist, and she's really actually conquered several artistic mediums, I think. But when I was a kid, one of the ones she was really into is she wanted to be an illustrator, and she she created like a bunch of children's books that she didn't end up publishing, but she was really into Neil Gaiman, but she was also really into Miyazaki films. So I watched all of them a bunch of times as kids, and like I feel like I think it was Princess Mononoke that probably traumatized me because that's the one with the heads, right? There's like a bunch of heads that get
that's a dark movie. That one's not made for children.
So because I remember watching Spirited Away a bunch of times. I remember watching Howl's Moving Castle. And then I remember.
How young are you? I went on a date with my wife to see. I mean, we weren't married at the time, but we went on a date to see Spirited Away. Like, what are you, 8?
Well, it came out in 2001, right?
2004, I think. Yeah.
Oh, Howl's Moving Castle. One of them came out in like 2001. But I think that was when I first started.
Because I know Mononoke came out in '99 in the States. It was like 2001, 2002 when Spirited Away was released, and I don't remember Howl's Moving Castle, but I do remember I won an advanced screening, so like I got to see it a week before everybody else did in this country, and then wrote a review for a sci-fi magazine.
Very cool.
So yeah, you can find it on SF Review.
Wait, which qualified as sci-fi again? Which of the movies qualified as sci-fi?
Of his movies, though, I mean, honestly, most of them are fantasy, but I would say Nausicaa Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which is a mouthful. But that one is definitely sci-fi. The others are hard, fantasy.
Yeah, I feel like he's more like a surrealist. Like he strikes me as a surrealist rather than like as a full-blown fantasy filmmaker, because like his stories are like very interestingly, very firmly rooted in the ground. I mean, like no wonder he's talking about labor issues and all of that, right? Like because he's like not really departing the reality in which he lives. He always finds a way firmly to be planted in it. Like I feel like one of the things that is distinctively different from, I mean, even he was talking to John Lasseter, who had like 3 Cars movies, and I don't know, he's like a canceled figure, so I don't know if it's like cool to be admitting to this at this point. I'm like a huge Cars fan. I love all of them, and even the bad ones, like even the ones that got poorly reviewed, I kind of like really dig.
You like Larry the Cable Guy?
The character, the Mater Tomater is like someone who I just like absolutely enjoyed as a kid, and I love Lightning McQueen. But
that's how I feel about Tim Allen as Buzz Lightyear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not in the same. I mean, Tim Allen is not canceled in the same exact way, though. I mean, Tim Allen is probably because he's like a Republican and whatnot.
Well, he said at one point that this is 1930s Germany because he's a conservative and people don't like his stuff because he's a conservative. It's 1930s Germany.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't be like that. No, just joking. But more like James Lasseter, where I mean, all the movies that he has been associated with.
I assumed that he was the Nazi in that scenario because
all of the stuff that James Lasseter has been associated with, in a kind of way, I mean, do have like that sense of childlike wonder in them, and especially Cars. If you read Roger Ebert's review. He feels like literally one of the reasons why I also felt validated about my interest and love for Cars was how rave reviewed it came out by Roger Ebert. Like he just like said some of the coolest things about it.
He didn't like Legend, which is our last episode we did. He said, and this is my favorite Roger Ebert quote I've ever heard. And my mom the other day, I was talking to her about I think it was when I was watching the Legend video of Siskel and Ebert, and she was like, "Do you remember when I used to say that you were eventually going to be just like Roger Ebert?" And I was like, "I just said the other day, one day I'm going to be the leftist Roger Ebert." Like I posted that, and she was like, "You are, don't worry." But he said, it's an amazing quote. He said about Legend. He said, "It's one of those movies you either get into right away or you don't," and I didn't. My favorite Roger Ebert quote.
I think interestingly about either Cars 1, no, I think it's definitely Cars 1, not 2, because Cars 2, he actually said some even cooler stuff. But Cars 1, he said like John Lasseter sounds like a guy who is in touch with his inner child, which is, I think, I mean, I don't know if that's like in a way it seems a little naive to be applying that label to Miyazaki, because like he does seem to be an extremely comfortable person in his own bleakness, which is why I feel like in this case the optimism might have a far more radical sort of tinge, as we see. Like it is actually rooted so much more firmly in reality. It's not escapist at all. He's not looking at this as like a sort of way of running away from the problems that they have, but to actually have these be creative solutions almost, like, which is kind of what is interesting, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So this is the manga and animation clip I wanted to play for Andy.
I want to talk a little bit about format. Some of you here tonight may be fans of what we in America call, in a very broad term, anime, or animation that comes from Japan. Yet, as many of you know, most anime films are based upon manga series or graphic novel series. And yet, Miyazaki-san has more or less abandoned that approach, basing a feature film on a manga, and gone his own way, developing his own ideas as original feature films. And I wonder why have you chosen to do that?
漫画の面白いものは漫画で見てればいいんじゃないか。それをアニメーションにするっていうのは、なんかそこでこう確かに付け加えることはできるかもしれませんが、やっぱり何か、難しいですね。やらなくて済むならやらない方がいいと僕は思ってます。
I think we can just enjoy manga by reading manga as they are. Of course, if you animate it, you can perhaps add some features to the manga. But I think if you can avoid making manga into animations, it's better.
漫画と映画っていうのはですね、アニメーションは時間と空間の感覚が全然違うもんなんです。それを心得ないとつまらないことをしてしまいます。アニメーションを漫画に書いても別に面白くないし、漫画をアニメーションにそのまま写し替えても面白くはないんですね。時間と空間がこう限りなくねじることができる。誇張したり縮小したり飛ばしたり、いろんなことができるのが漫画です。でもアニメーションはやっぱり現実の世界を、ここに現実の世界を私たちはこういうふうに絵で描きましたっていう作り方をするもんだと僕は思ってるんです。時間の流れも、それから空間のありようも。それで映画になるんだと思いますが。ですから漫画と映画っていうのはやっぱり違うんだっていうふうに、僕らは映画の方に属しているっていうふうに思ってます。ちょっと長くなりすぎました。
Manga and film, animation film, have very different concepts of time and space. And unless you are very aware of that, then the ultimate product can become very boring and uninteresting. You have to know that the sense of time in terms of expanding time or condensing time, stretching time, and space as well is very different in the two media. In animation, and especially in manga, that sense of expansion or condensation of time is a very salient feature. For animation, we are very intent on showing that we have drawn this, that time and space flow as we have drawn the frames. So I think that's the important difference that we need to keep in mind.
It's very important.
That's like some Scott McCloud shit right there. I know Forrest.
Understanding manga.
Which is, I don't know, did he actually write that? I know that's a book.
Really? Understanding comics is a book. Yeah.
No,
that's Scott McCloud's book.
That's the Scott McCloud reference.
discussing how time works in comics, and especially what we don't quite understand as how manga is
So
published.
he just continuously puts himself into manga.
But no, manga is published very differently than how we digest in the States, because here we buy individual comics and then those get collected into graphic novels, and then like they just go on for forever, and it doesn't matter where you start. Where like what you do is you don't buy a monthly comic from Japan. You buy like a digest with like a bunch of stories, and then you vote for your favorite one. So right now, One Piece, for example, is the most popular mangaka in
that's how we used to do. And I'm sure that this is global. I'm sure this isn't just but like pulp novels, right? That's how they used to write those stories, like the stories that would end up becoming the noir genre of film. Those stories would come out because they would have these large compendiums kind of that you would get every month of all these different pulp novels, like novelizations.
But those were never meant to be collected, though. Whereas
they 100% were.
Some of them were, but not all of them.
Well, sometimes you would just have
most of the time they were just standalone short stories.
Yeah, well, sometimes you would just have a novelization, but there was also a similar a format with some of these. They would have them in kind of almost like a magazine format, where they would give you a bunch of stories, and you would get sometimes either the story would continue every month, or you would get them as
most of the pulp books, though, don't have continuation story from month to month. There were some; those were the minority. That did exist beforehand. With like Dickens was like that. Tale for Two Cities and shit was published. Serialized.
Serially, right? Yeah.
But a lot of those pulp books were just like one and done, because like, what if you went to the newsstand, you can get the next part. They didn't always have the guarantee that you're gonna stick around, because a lot of those publishers weren't around. So most of those were like one and done stories, and rarely were they serialized. So
pulp magazines are a thing.
But
I don't know if I'm like sorry, yeah, finish your thought, Andrew. Sorry.
But yeah, no, the mangakas are always a continuation, and if they are popular enough, they'll stay in there. So like Shonen Jump is the most popular one, and the fans actually vote for the stuff, which again, you don't have that kind of interaction. So you don't know who's the most popular one other than by the letters that you might receive.
There are four successful pulp magazines: Argosy, Adventure, Blue Book, Short Stories, and a lot of the stories that we get from certain noir films. Because I took a whole class on this. A lot of the Shadow is one of them. Like they have a large contingency of ones that before pulp novels were given as a singular pulp novel, they would actually have these short stories that would get adapted.
Eventually, like that's where it evolved.
They started before pulp novels. They started in the 1800s.
But okay, yeah. Well, the dime novels are a little different than because
the dime novels were different. I'm talking about pulp magazines.
Yeah, no, the pulps, as they're often referred to, which were like the predecessors to the comic book industry, Jack Kirby worked for. I've looked at a lot of these, and very few of them are like a continual story.
Yeah, those are a different thing than what I'm talking about. There's pulp magazines that were short stories by authors that would continue over time that were serialized.
Eventually they got but that's not, the pulps didn't start off
the other way around. It started as a magazine thing. It started in the 1800s, and you would get a monthly thing, and the story would continue throughout the months. And I took a whole lecture class on this.
But by the time you get to the detective era stuff, it was a very different model, because publishers would just pop up. So like they don't know if they're going to even publish.
No, you're right about
issue.
That.
I mean, that's what like the Ninja Turtles, for example. When I'm just because I know this one off the top of my head. I don't know my pulps as well. To cite an example like this. But the very first issue of the Ninja Turtles, they kill off Shredder because they didn't know that there was going to be a second issue.
They go giant mousetrap.
That is actually what they did with the Mousers in the next storyline, but if you know your Ninja Turtles. The
only reason why I'm pushing back on some of this is because I took a class and I know that the professor
but also like
that I've been like, hey, you should watch Movie Night Extravaganza. You should watch Movie Night Extravaganza if he ever does, and I look like I don't know what I'm talking about.
I actually I wonder if we're talking about two different types of pulps.
We definitely are. I'm talking about like the Shadow.
Like
the Shadow
amazing stories and weird tales.
A lot of them are one-offs. A lot of them are one-offs.
I mean, the stuff that like connected to comics, which is what most people refer to as the pulps. Nowadays.
Well, it wasn't just that. There was a whole bunch of different kinds, but like stuff like the Shadow that were serialized, they would continue. And I was just looking at.
But again, a lot of these like they were short stories up until like they for a while too, because that's also how people bought them, because they in the 30s at least where like comics kind of came out of. People weren't always going to have that extra dime to buy the stuff. I mean, 30% of the population.
I'm talking about like 40 years before that, starting in the 1800s, like in the 1890s, there were these like serialized pulp magazines, and
then they became these standalone stories. Which is where comics came out of, which is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So what I was bringing
when people talk about pulps, like there are plenty of YouTube channels like FizzFop, for example, is a great one that goes over a lot of the pulp stuff. And he does do stuff from the 1800s, but he mostly focuses on the characters that were popular in the 1930s and 40s, which is what today we tend to really think of as from the pulps. But then there's also amazing stories and weird tales, which were also short story sci-fi. Birthed science fiction and modern horror.
And they also ended up kind of becoming like this almost and this is later, but they ended up becoming almost like what we think of as like airplane books, like you know what I mean, like they would have the books that you'd like buy at the airport or something. You're like, oh well, I have a book now to read on an airplane. So they went in all directions, and it's kind of crazy because it's kind of one of the first iterations of like mass entertainment.
But the big difference is that they didn't have that voting that manga has in Japan. Like people aren't like saying, "Oh my God, I love and I'm just blanking on the big one there.
One Piece, is that what you're...
One Piece, yeah, One Piece, which is like the most popular. And people vote for that every month, which is why we know which one's the most popular, which one's the second most popular, because it's voted on, and that one wins every single time. And so the studio that One Piece, and one of the interesting things about the mangaka who creates One Piece, he actually when he publishes the books, which is what we usually see in the States, he actually takes the time and has his people redraw parts of it. But like their stuff in the in Shonen Jump is usually like much cruder. So interesting. We get the polished version basically.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I also noticed that Miyazaki is, I don't know if Miyazaki stuff also became manga or like how he feels about it, or if he's also created, but it seems like the shot making in all of his movies, but more so in this one, is that there's a lot of still like images in which the character like has a brisk sort of lively motion, like either crossing the frame like this, or like going up and down, or like diagonally cutting the frame. And I think that a lot of the manga, at least like comics that I know of and like that have been translated into the screen, tend to have a lot of abruptness in the shot switching itself. Like I feel like he has a lot of long shots. So I think that in general, it's almost like Paul Thomas Anderson making a film with a lot of smash cuts. I don't think it's gonna work, because like that's a guy who sets up a shot for like 10 minutes at a time, and or like sets up I mean like even Paul Thomas Anderson wouldn't make sense in this respect. I'm kind of blanking on who could be an analogy in like actual filmmaking.
I mean, like Chloe Zhao certainly does that with Nomadland.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she has like long tracking shots. Yeah, definitely from
just one off the top of my head.
Right, but
wow,
I wonder who has like
climbing on some rocks.
But I wonder who has like this stable
It's a gorgeous
shot.
film, by the way. I just have to say,
Yeah.
for all I hate on that film fucking constantly on the show, and it's a gorgeous film. It's beautifully shot. And she's kind of dressed very neutrally. Like her clothing is very neutral when she's in the desert, and it's still shot beautifully.
Yeah, and also like the lighting that they get, because like it's just after the sun goes behind the horizon line, so the colors on the landscape are washed out, but the sky is like on fire, and so you have this wonderful contrast between the two. I
hate how fucking nicely that is shot.
Yeah, I mean, like there's never been a more beautiful film about poverty, right? Like that's the whole point of it. But that said, like I was wondering, like just to be on the topic, like,
Bezos money, y'all.
Like having a very still backdrop and having like some really energetic, lively action happening in the foreground, I feel like is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Like she also has a lot of tracking shots, and like sometimes the motion in the foreground is kind of synchronous with the background as well. Like it's not very fast. It's not a lot of contrast in the amount of energy that the background brings to the foreground. But I feel like Miyazaki sets up a very, very stable shot for like 5 minutes. It's kind of like the same type of motion, but the characters are just jumping around and, having these kind of very lively actions. And I don't know if that'll like necessarily translate very well if you were to draw that as a storyboard. So I actually wonder how his storyboards would look.
Well, I mean, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. You have a perfect example right there.
Talking about his storyboards. I said, you want to see a clip where he's talking about his storyboards? I did, in fact, grab one of those.
Sure, yeah.
And I did, want to say, like, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is a perfect example of him actually doing the manga before he did the film. So like, he is well versed in the medium of comics. So like, if he's going to discuss the difference between the two, he is absolutely like understands both mediums so well because he's just done it.
Although he hates one of them. No, I'm kidding.
In the United States, animation films tend to be storyboarded, or the storyboards tend to be done by a group of artists, storyboard by committee, if you will. But I know that you do your own storyboards yourself. Do you think there's an advantage to having a single artistic vision dominate, essentially?
アメリカではストーリーボードは大体グループでやりますね。委員会がストーリーボードを作ってるっていうので、宮崎さんのやり方はご自分でストーリーボードを書かれるということで、そういうふうに一人のそういう芸術的なビジョンっていうのがあるっていうことが非常に強力な要素ですか？
いや、日本ではストーリーボードは大体ディレクターが自分で一人で書くというのが通常の方法です。稀にストーリーボードマンとそのディレクターが分かれていることがありますけども、基本的にディレクターの資格というのは、ストーリーボードを全部自分で書けるというのが条件ですね。ストーリーボードが出来上がってしまえば、彼がいなくても大体映画はできるっていうふうに多くの人が思ってます。
In Japan, it's a normal method to have the director draw the storyboard. Occasionally, there's different people working on it. Somebody who draws the storyboard, and somebody who directs the films. But that's not the usual method. And in fact, it's almost a condition to become a director, to be able to draw the storyboard. So if a person can't draw a storyboard, then he'll be thought of as being unnecessary to the production of a film, even though he is the director. That's one way of thinking, let's say. I don't want to get into trouble here.
I like the fact that we could all feel like Pete Buttigieg and understand Japanese with every time he said storyboards.
But I mean, it's interesting, the relationship, I think, between well, number one, kind of his way of thinking about filmmaking, like his way of thinking about the collective understanding of this as he says, kind of in the other clip, like our film, but also kind of the understanding that like one person is going to be creative master, and storyboard by committee fucking sucks. Storyboard by committee, like in the US, is not a good system, I don't think, a lot of times, because a lot of the jokes and like, you know, comments and lines have to be storyboarded to the point where they're toothless. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's definitely hard to create a film that speaks to everybody and isn't just kind of referencing other things. So I find it, you know, his kind of definition of the roles that people play within, because I think these clips are, I don't remember if they're back to back or if they're kind of a little bit, I think they might be a little bit separated. The one we watched before that about when he's talking about yeah, like I think it's an interesting question about like the development of a film itself, and like, because storyboard by committee in the United States a lot of times has to do with money and like, you know, everybody kind of having a say, because it's the same thing with like sitcoms, like where everybody in the room kind of has a like, oh, you want to make a joke, well, everyone's going to dumb down your joke until the point where, you know, the dumbest person in the audience could understand it. So it's like, I don't know.
So that's what like makes I feel like I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that he is kind of being a little bit of a diplomatic person. I think that he probably wields a far tighter control than he's letting off. It's extremely unlikely that I think like to have the kind of consistency that he has. I mean, like, I don't know to what extent the Pixar movies are, you know, in a sense, a collective project.
Well, actually, I know the answer to that one.
Mm-hmm.
When Steve Jobs founded Pixar, he put the bathroom in the middle of the building so everybody would have a chance to meet. And oh God, I fucking hate this story. But his whole idea is like you know, people would like meet by the bathroom and have discussions about what it is they're working on. Which is a weird way of like manipulating employees to bring stuff together.
But he's also like, see, that's what it's like Steve Jobs is probably a good example to draw a parallel with, because I think he's also one of those guys who gives the impression of collaborative work, but it's like it's extremely dictatorial. Like he was
he's gonna say where the bathroom is.
Yeah, and like I think the interesting thing about what Miyazaki is pointing out is that like I feel like it's less of a kind of collectivization answer and more of like a diplomatic, well, I won't exactly tell you how this shit works type of answer, because it does seem like, you know, the visual consistency, the metaphorical, the narrative consistency that his movies have had, like, I mean, for 35-40 years now, I don't think it's possible if they even as much as had another figure have as much as control as he has. Like, I think he probably has like insane amount of control to the extent that every card, every storyboard goes through him or something like that, you know, and that's the kind of thing that
the bathrooms are everywhere at Studio Ghibli.
Except that he goes to every single bathroom. That's the point. Yeah.
My bathroom, our bathroom.
It's just like he goes when everyone takes a shit, and he's just like, yeah, I want to know what you're working on. No, but it's like,
but his view of centralization seems very interesting, because it's not, when he said it in the first clip, right? It's not that everyone has a say and they kind of all collectively decide choices. It's that everybody has a role, and their roles collectively play into the whole of something, which I think is a much more, when it comes to creative work, is a much more like a much more honest and a much more introspective view of whether something is centralized, right? Like, because when it comes to storyboard by committee, who the fuck is in that committee. It's the people that are like, kind of presiding over the work. Like it's a bunch of producers and the writers in a room together deciding whatever. That's why things are so toothless. You know what I mean? So when it's each person kind of understanding their role and playing the full capacity of their role, it's not like we're sitting around workshopping ideas. It's that there's a whole that's already understood at the beginning of it, and everyone is working towards making that whole as beautiful as possible and as good as possible. And if you have an idea and you're the person that's doing like the audio editing and you like kind of bring your idea to the table and that idea is beautiful and everyone wants to agree with it and like, you know what I mean? And it makes the thing better. Like it suddenly becomes our work because it's not just a bunch of people sitting around a table like in a boardroom being like, well, that's going to piss off this person and this is going to piss off this person. I don't want to do it that way. It's rather everybody kind of realizing I want to be the best audio engineer I can be. I want to be the best, editor I can be. I want to be the best writer I can be, and bringing that to the table and kind of collectively creating something beautiful. Now, I'm sure if you have an idea for something and you want to bring it to people higher than you and say, I have this idea, you're 100% welcome to do that. But it's not kind of this fake version of it where it's like, everyone with money, like everyone submitting money to this movie suddenly is sitting around a table and is like, well, I work for this, I have investments in this company. I don't think you can make that McDonald's joke, which is what, storyboard by committee is.
Right. No, of course. Yeah. I mean, like to that extent, I think you're right in that like everybody can probably weigh in that capacity, but like they cannot weigh in from the capacity of like having a corporate sponsor, etc. That much integrity, I think he absolutely, it's exactly what he's saying. But I'm pointing out the fact that like I don't think there's a single shot or a single frame or a single even image that can go on the screen if this guy hasn't okayed it. I think that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Like which is
I
like
think I think even in egalitarian creation that would be the case, right? Like the idea that something is egalitarian, the idea that it is kind of collectively decided on. It doesn't mean that hierarchy in that sense will be abolished. Like, it's that everybody does have their ideas taken in, and everybody does kind of have their ideas considered in their own capacity, and then creating a whole piece kind of comes down to like you kind of have to buy in to the person at the top of it. I don't think that you can really create. I don't think that egalitarian creation in the sense of like everybody says, hey, I don't like this. And then, that has to all automatically like, you know what I mean? Like then there's a vote on it. I don't think that kind of creation works. I think you have to kind of buy into the fact that somebody as kind of a genius creator, as Miyazaki, I think is, like has to have the final say and has to kind of create the overall idea of something that everybody then collectively is bringing their best to. And I think that for leftists, for socialists, like this is a conversation that does need to be had at some point. Because at some point, if everybody in a place has their has equal say, that doesn't necessarily provide a good product in the end. And it kind of ends up the same way with I mean, even with like unionization and the way that that's going to work in the end. Like you're going to have to create, like you're going to have to all collectively decide that somebody is the person that that is part of the collective like bargaining in a certain situation. Like there always is going to be somebody that kind of everyone like decides democratically that this is the final the final person.
Yeah, you decide on the process and you make sure that everybody's aware of the process and this is how things work and we've got to do it like that. Yeah, I mean, I can get behind that. I wonder, like, I mean, we should probably like do something of his at some point. But like, I've always wondered that the kind of distinction between Miyazaki and Satoshi Kon, who's younger than Miyazaki, and like I feel like the kind of movies and the kind of concepts that both conceptually in terms of the narrative and in terms of the filmmaking and the shot selection. I feel like they're completely different while still retaining a similar sort of like artistic quality that like very exceptionally high level artistic productions. But like a movie like Paprika, I don't think Miyazaki would make, because it's like extremely disjunctive. Like it doesn't have the same kind of fluidity and then the landscape filmmaking that Miyazaki has. And I wonder how that like Satoshi Kon would approach storyboarding and shot selection in that sort of way, because the shots, as I said, like that kind of, he has more of a tendency to be even okay with like smash cuts and kind of more abrupt scene changes and things like that, which Miyazaki kind of maintains a more flowy narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that, but I'd be willing to do an episode on that, like, and talk through that and talk through the differences.
What's this movie again?
Paprika is like, and he also made famously, I think, Tokyo Godfathers. That's like supposed to be the big movie.
Oh yeah, I know that one. Yes, that's a beautiful movie. It's been ages since I've seen that one.
Paprika is like, to me, a far more accomplished version of Inception and Dream as reality, and like filmmaking that concerns like dreams and interpretations in a far more like skillful, masterful way than like Christopher Nolan can even dream of. And like that's why when Inception came, Inception was like basically a 3-story building compared to like Satoshi Kon's Paprika, which was like all over the place. Like, and yet there was such a coherent logic also.
I'm watching the trailer right now. It's beautiful. This dude just like split into two and then exploded into butterflies.
It's an R-rated movie also. Yeah, I mean, like Miyazaki, I don't think has ever made like an R-rated movie as such.
Yeah, Mononoke was PG-13, which is probably the closest he ever came. That's like the darkest he'll get. Unless his next movie is that he's come out of retirement for. He's going to do his version of 50 Shades of Grey.
But we're about to hit the 2-hour mark, so I'm going to ask Karthik, do you have final thoughts on this? We've gotten.
Man, I'm so spoiled by the one-liners. But before we do that, let us not forget. If you're watching us right now, please subscribe. If you have an Amazon Prime account, please subscribe with that. It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps us out. So everything's good with that. Discord is coming, and if you would
Discord is coming.
If you would rather
disagree on everything,
hit up our Patreon.
Discord with all three of the hosts.
But if you want to hit up our Patreon, patreon.com/movie night extra, or is it extravaganza?
Yeah, movie night extra.
Okay. Sorry.
I should also say that we'll be back tomorrow with Never Ending Story. And when we get off, I'm probably going to watch Never Ending Story again because I want to revisit my childhood and having ear infections. So there you go. But Karthik, final thoughts on this movie, on Miyazaki in general. I would like to do more Miyazaki stuff in the future. I mean, not just because I watched them as much as I did when I was a kid, and parts of things are definitely like left out of that remembrance. So like I enjoyed revisiting this tremendously because of that. But yeah.
I think thanks for having me on, of course, and I think like I would love to be part of any Miyazaki discussion, and I mean like if you decide to do Paprika or any of the Satoshi Kon movies, that'd be pretty cool as well, because it's like an R-rated Miyazaki. What would it be like? I mean, like you don't even have to look any further, because he is right there as an example. And I don't think Miyazaki would make an R-rated movie, because I feel like his audience, he wants a more universal audience, as is evidenced by his universal message, which to me, I mean, like interestingly, I can't believe that like he actually takes such offense with translation or dubbing, because I think it's very rare that you find a filmmaker or an artist in the vernacular to be as translatable as Miyazaki is, despite and I think that's largely because his images do the talking, it's always like been fascinating to see the interpretations of Miyazaki in juxtaposition with like a Western version of the story, where I think Totoro is like definitely got lots of Alice in Wonderland in it. He made Kiki's Delivery Service is supposed to be Sabrina Teenage Witch, kind of there's a lot of parallels. and also it's a completely different treatment than like, I mean, anything that
It's
you
a slog. I'll be honest
Yeah.
with you. That one is like one of the more boring Miyazaki films. And you know, granted, I've not seen the subbed version. I've only seen the dubbed. So you know, there could be a difference in the with the translation. So
Yeah, and
Nobody
like, you know,
plants a single seed.
Howl's Moving Castle, I don't know if I'm like reading too much into it, but like there's a lot of Wizard of Oz kind of feel to it. Ponyo is supposed to be like reminiscent of Little Mermaid and things like that. So there is like a
Which
direct
are culturally diverse stories. I don't think that necessarily
right, yeah.
any of
They're
those
not
stories.
derivative, yeah, but like it's very interesting
Yeah.
to see them together because you almost see the very clearly the cultural divide. And I think where Miyazaki is coming from, he I mean, like I'm lately starting to think, as much as like there's a humanist, radical sort of optimist, radical pessimistic optimism as an oxymoron in Miyazaki's films. But on the other hand, there's also a sort of traditionalism or conservatism in his like return to family, return to community, like
Yeah.
the small community kind of
and
attitude.
I think that that's kind of a spiritual conservatism, which you know, I don't think we talk about enough. Like I think that we kind of consider conservatism within this bubble of like, you know, return to family, return to culture. And I think I don't necessarily get the feeling that like the dad in this you know, he's still working at the university. It's not like it's a return to this rural life
Yeah.
so much that it's like abandoning the life that he's made for himself. Assumably, life that he's made for himself, he continues with, right? Like he wants
It's
to
not a
bring his,
rejection of modernity. Yeah, definitely.
it's a rejection also of like industrialization, which you can see even in that Miyazaki clip that we watched, like a rejection of this kind of relentless pursuit of profit that, like, you know, comes out of things that I think gels with like almost like a kind of leftism, like a kind of you know, return to the land itself, return to understanding of the spirituality that is an interesting corollary to the like to the much more rural, I think, conservatism of the U.S. Because I think that you can be incredibly egalitarian in the way that you treat community, and I think you could be incredibly like progressive in the way that you kind of treat the people around you and the world around you. Like it's not like they're returning to a place that their family is from, right? Like they're returning to a place that they've never been before. They're like, well, let's buy a house here, which is it's an interesting acceptance of the society around you as kind of all encompassing, and your own position in it or your own location in it, and not so much rooted in a place or like in tradition that you yourself kind of overbear on the people around you in kind of like this conservative way, but on just the idea that like industrialization itself kind of has taken us away from this feeling of you know, like this environmental, you know, this environmental conservatism, I'd say, like this idea that we need to, you know, be back in nature, but not necessarily the nature that the nature that like you know, for generations we've been
Pondered,
on.
yeah.
Yeah.
What I think is also the flip side to that, which is what is interesting about Miyazaki, and I think his surrealism in general, is that the child leads the adult, and I think that's like something. It's the opposite. I don't know if it's like it's a little flippant for me to be saying that it's the opposite in Western kind of fantasy, but in large part, I think it's like either escapist and or a sort of child becoming an adult kind of narrative that is prioritized. But I think in Miyazaki's case, and it's the case of a lot of, I think, a lot of post-colonial kind of fantasy also have like seen where the younger kind of inhabitant, the younger resident of community, the child tends to have more of like optimism, more imagination, and more kind of like new ways of thinking that can be nurtured and cultivated. And it's almost like saying that the adults would be better served by learning from them rather than like to shutting them out and saying that, listen to me and like follow along in my way. That's why like it's almost kind of I'm hesitate to call him a conservative, because he's definitely not a conservative in that respect at all. He's not telling the child to follow in his direction. He's in fact like kind of as we said earlier, like My Neighbor Totoro is almost entirely the child kind of bringing them all around to embracing the wildness of their imagination and seeing and deriving a lot of joy and optimism from that. And I think that's why it's set against such a bleak and ominous sort of narrative, because that's where you need to derive the optimism and joy from. And I think like I'd like to see a lot of his movies from this sort of lens and see how each of them compares. But I think My Neighbor Totoro definitely fits the bill for this type of narrative.
Yeah, and Sasuke almost like pushes back and says like, "Oh, she thinks she saw Totoro," and
Right.
the dad is like, "Well, the forest spirits." Like, and I mean that is the way that you kind of. That's why I asked that earlier, like the way that you kind of humor your kid, but at the same time, like it does also feel like it's kind of almost like a return to this almost religious and spiritual. Like acceptance of nature and the acceptance of nature itself kind of has to consent to our presence. And
Shinto actually does believe in the spirit of the nature, like different
Wait, I should set this up. Andy, final thoughts.
Okay, I'm just gonna give a very rough definition of Shintoism here. So I apologize to anybody who knows far more than I, but this will at least kind of get us a better understanding. Shinto does believe in, like I said, a type of spirituality of nature, which is presented by different types of creatures, which are almost like demons or spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to kind of define it as. And this movie very much, the father's obviously, practices Shinto in some form. We don't really, they don't really delve into that, too much, but like the way he thanked the trees, the way he told the story of, how trees and people used to be friends. That's very Shinto, but it's an everyday lived Shinto and not like how a Shinto is taught and practiced. So you're getting a very a more like a layman's view of what Shintoism is in Miyazaki films, and specifically My Neighbor Totoro.
Yeah. All right. I mean, I think that's cool. I think it's an interesting. I mean, looking at like indigenous beliefs in the U.S. and how they probably did kind of expand,
which is a little different than Shintoism, but there's similarities. Like I'm
saying, like the idea that kind of everything in nature kind of has a spirit, and you need to honor it, and I kind of find it fascinating that like throughout these different cultures that are like ancient cultures, not really European culture, but kind of everywhere else, right? Like there is a very like there's a connection that kind of organically evolves to nature and to the land in which you live on, and to it kind of sucks being a carnivore that lives on it lives in the world and believes that everything has a spirit, and the fact that we kind of have to honor everything that when that's like the more Native American view of things, like we need to honor things that we eat. Like it kind of for me has always been kind of beautiful, like this environmental idea of everything. And
but he kind of brings up the concept of like us corrupting nature's spirit through the way we're living, which you see that more in say Spirited Away, for example, with especially like the scene of the bathhouse where she pulls out all the junk from this water deity.
Yeah, but my last final thoughts are going to be to you, Andy, and what I'm going to say to you is, what are you, a great big soot gremlin?